In the harsh winter of 1206, when Temüjin was proclaimed Genghis Khan by the Mongolian tribes at the Onon River kurultai, few could have predicted that his most potent weapon would not be the composite bow or the swift horses of his army, but rather an intricate web of psychological warfare that would reshape the medieval world, just as the ancient Chinese strategist Sun Tzu wrote, "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." Genghis Khan would embody this principle throughout his conquests. The great Khan's military genius extended far beyond the battlefield, creating an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe through a masterful manipulation of fear and perception. This transformation from a minor tribal leader to the architect of history, his largest contiguous land empire, began with unifying the Mongol tribes through a combination of military prowess and psychological manipulation, notably demonstrated in his systematic elimination of rival chiefs like Jamukha, his childhood blood brother. The reputation of the Mongol army preceded them like a shadow across the Silk Road. By 1219, when Genghis Khan launched his campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire, merchants and travelers had already spread tales of entire cities being erased from existence. In the case of Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, the Mongols deliberately allowed refugees to flee north, carrying horrific stories of the city's destruction. The Khan deliberately allowed survivors of conquered cities to flee, carrying with them stories of unprecedented devastation. This strategy proved particularly effective during the siege of Bukhara, where 3,000 defenders were so paralyzed by fear that they surrendered almost immediately. The city's fall was followed by the systematic destruction of its great library and the execution of its scholars, demonstrating that not even centers of learning were safe. A contemporary chronicler, Juvaini, recorded the words of Genghis Khan as he entered the city's grand mosque. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me." The Khan's network of spies and informants, known as the Yam system, was arguably the most sophisticated intelligence network of the medieval world. In 1221, before the attack on Samarkand, Mongol agents circulated rumors that the army numbered in the millions, when in reality it rarely exceeded 100,000 warriors. The network stretched across thousands of miles with relay stations positioned every 20-30 miles, allowing information and disinformation to travel at an unprecedented speed of 200 miles per day. The system employed not only military scouts but also merchants, diplomats, and religious figures. One notable spy was Chukai, a Khitan advisor who provided crucial intelligence about Chinese cities while posing as an astrologer. The famous Venetian trader Marco Polo would later describe this network in his travels, noting how it employed over 2,000 horses and tens of thousands of personnel. The psychological impact of Mongol symbolism reached new heights of horror after the conquest of Urgin. Genghis Khan ordered the construction of pyramids using the skulls of 24,000 defeated warriors. Similar displays were erected outside Nishapur and MV, where estimates suggest that between 7,000 and 13,000 people were killed. The destruction of Nishapur was particularly brutal, as it was the hometown of Genghis Khan's son-in-law, who had been killed by an arrow during the siege. In response, the Khan's daughter requested that every living thing in the city be killed, including cats and dogs. The Mongols would often leave behind specific markers. 3 arrows planted in the ground signified imminent attack, while a broken arrow represented mercy for those who surrendered without resistance. In some cases, they would send advanced parties to paint their horses' bridles red with blood, creating an ominous symbol of impending doom. The Khan's approach to alliances demonstrated a ruthless pragmatism that kept both allies and enemies in constant fear. The fate of the Tangut people serves as a stark example. After serving as loyal allies during the early expansion of the Mongol Empire, they were completely annihilated in 1227 when Genghis Khan suspected they might pose a future threat. The campaign against the Tanguts was so thorough that their written language and culture were almost completely lost to history. The Jin dynasty faced a similar fate, Despite initial cooperation, they were systematically destroyed between 1211 and 1234. During this campaign, the Mongols employed psychological warfare by forcing captured Jin soldiers to write letters to their families, describing the futility of resistance. An Arab historian recorded a saying that emerged during this period. Today is friend is tomorrow, is victim within enemy territories. Genghis Khan masterfully exploited existing tensions. During the campaign against the Jin dynasty, he successfully turned Chinese generals against their rulers by offering them positions of power within his army. One such General Shan defected to the Mongols and provided crucial intelligence that led to the fall of Kayun in 1234. The practice of incorporating enemy officers into the Mongol military became so common that by 1230, nearly a third of Mongol military commanders were former enemies. The Khan would often send messages to enemy commanders, offering wealth and positions in exchange for betrayal, creating an atmosphere of distrust that undermined defensive capabilities. A Chinese proverb from this period warns, "The Mongol sword has two edges. One cuts the enemy, the other cuts the friend." The Mongols' tactical deception reached its apex in their famous feigned retreat strategy. During the Battle of the Kalala River, Subutai, one of Genghis Khan's most trusted generals, led Russian forces into a devastating trap by appearing to retreat for 9 days. The pursuing Russian princes, eager for glory, broke their formations and were systematically destroyed. This same tactic was employed successfully at the Battle of Liegnitz, where European knights unfamiliar with these tactics were completely outmaneuvered. The effectiveness of this strategy was so renowned that the medieval chronicler Matthew Paris wrote, "They flee in order to conquer, and when they flee, none can escape them." In the spring of 1221, during the siege of Bamyan in present-day Afghanistan, the Mongols demonstrated another layer of their psychological warfare. After the death of Genghis Khan's grandson Mukhan, the Khan ordered not just the city's destruction, but commanded that no living thing should survive, not even cats or dogs. The site was renamed Mali, or City of Sorrow, and remained uninhabited for generations. The destruction was so complete that local legends claim the ground remained poisoned for 100 years. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din recorded that even the stones wept at the desolation. Through these calculated strategies of terror, misinformation, and betrayal, Genghis Khan created an empire that covered 12 million square miles. By the time of his death in 1227, his psychological warfare was so effective that cities as far as Vienna trembled at the mere mention of his name, even though his armies never reached that far. The Arab historian Ibn al-Athir captured the devastation in his chronicles, writing, "For many years I put off writing about this event. If someone said that since God created Adam until now, the world had not been afflicted with such a calamity, he would be right." Genghis Khan's most terrifying punishments and methods of destruction became legendary. In the shadow of the Mongol Empire's meteoric rise, a system of punishment so severe emerged that it would echo through centuries, leaving an indelible mark on human history. As the Chinese philosopher Lao once wrote, "Those who control others through force will never truly succeed." Yet Genghis Khan seemed to defy this wisdom, creating an empire where fear and brutal justice became the cornerstone of governance. The great Khan's approach to discipline and punishment wasn't merely about retribution. It was a calculated instrument of power that helped forge the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen, spanning from Korea to Eastern Europe. The Yasa Genghis Khan's legal code, established around 1206, near Lake Baal, codified a brutal hierarchy of punishment that began within his own ranks. The code contained 36 specific capital offenses, including urinating in running water, which was considered sacred, and cooking food with unwashed hands. According to Persian historian Juvaini, the code mandated death for warriors who abandoned their comrades in battle, with one particularly chilling account from 1214, describing how 3 deserters from the siege of Zhongdu were publicly executed by being broken in half, a punishment that literally split the body at the waist. The famous commander Jabi faced this potential fate after killing Genghis Khan's horse in battle, but was spared after showing exceptional courage in admitting his deed. The message was clear: loyalty wasn't to merely expected, it was enforced through terror. Genghis Khan's treatment of spies and traitors was notoriously brutal, creating a legacy of terror that cemented his reputation. In 1219, during his campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire, he ordered the execution of captured spies in an especially gruesome way. The spies were tied to posts and left to die of thirst, their faces coated with honey, which attracted insects. This horrific punishment was meant to instill fear and obedience, with Genghis Khan famously declaring, "A traitor's death serves two purposes. It ends one betrayal and prevents 1,000 more." His message was clear. Treason would not be tolerated. The Mongols were experts in using public executions to assert their dominance and strike terror into the hearts of their enemies. In 1220, after the fall of Bukhara, wealthy merchants who had resisted the Mongol forces were gathered in the town square, where molten silver was poured into their eyes and ears. This punishment was symbolic, meant to punish greed and defiance. A similar fate awaited the people of Samarkand, where gold replaced silver for the wealthiest offenders. The screams of the victims echoed throughout the city for 3 days, marking the execution as a gruesome spectacle. The Mongols did not stop there. In 1221, during the siege of Balkh, captured soldiers were used as human shields, their bodies pierced with arrows from both sides. Such acts were part of a systematic approach to crushing resistance, a strategy known as the 7 Steps of Destruction. This approach became notorious after the fall of the city of MV, where the population of 700,000 was divided into groups, with artisans and craftsmen sent to Mongolia, while the rest were executed over weeks. Soldiers killed up to 100,000 people per day, leaving only 400 survivors to spread the word of the destruction. Further atrocities followed. In 1227, when an uprising occurred in the Jin territory near Beijing, Genghis Khan ordered the rebels to be boiled alive in cauldrons while their families watched. The sight of these large pots became so feared that it induced panic in the surrounding population. In other cities, such as Kayun, entire neighborhoods were wiped out for lesser offenses, like hoarding weapons. The Mongols embraced collective punishment, which became a key part of their control. The principle of 9 exterminations, killing 9 generations of a criminal S family, meant that entire communities could be eradicated for the crimes of one individual. In the Bamiyan Valley in 1232, an entire village of 12,000 people was buried alive for harboring fugitives. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din recorded that the earth moved for 3 days as the struggles of the buried were heard. Mongol punitive expeditions, often referred to as the Great Terror, became a hallmark of their rule. When the city of Herat rebelled in 1229, General Chagan led a 6-month campaign, during which the city's buildings were dismantled, irrigation systems destroyed, and farmlands salted. The population dropped dramatically from 1 million to just 40,000, with the city's great library burned to the ground. The Mongols developed increasingly sophisticated methods of torture and execution. One particularly harrowing method, known as death by warmth, involved wrapping victims in fresh animal hides that slowly crushed them as the hides dried. This method was used on captured Song dynasty officials. Another technique involved tying prisoners between bent saplings, which would tear their bodies apart when the saplings were released. These punishments were not reserved for common criminals. Even Genghis Khan's family was not immune. His brother Khasar was publicly humiliated and imprisoned in 128 for suspected treason, and his son Yoki was stripped of his command for failing to execute a military campaign properly. Genghis Khan's commitment to justice was absolute, as evidenced by the execution of his sister Temüjin's family in 1216 for harboring spies. The message was unequivocal. No one was above the law. This principle was reflected in the Mongols' rituals surrounding punishment. Before executions, elaborate ceremonies took place, with the victims bowing 9 times toward the north, acknowledging the supreme power of the Khan. These rituals added a spiritual dimension to the already terrifying executions. The Khan's execution methods were so well orchestrated that they became a form of psychological warfare. One of the most infamous sites of Mongol execution was the Stage of Judgment, built during the siege of Urgen in 1221. This wooden platform allowed up to 100 prisoners to be executed at once in full view of the city's defenders. The executions occurred in waves, with each new group forced to clean up the bodies of those who had been executed before them. The sight was so horrifying that it drove many to madness, with some women throwing their children from the walls to avoid them falling into Mongol hands. The platform remained standing for decades, a stark reminder of Mongol justice. Mongol executioners, known as the Yasa, were specially trained in torture techniques. Their fearsome appearance, marked by black leather armor and red face paint, was enough to terrify even the bravest. These executioners were responsible for developing new methods of mass execution, such as collapsing wooden platforms that could crush hundreds of victims at once. The effects of these punishments were profound. Cities would often surrender without a fight upon hearing that Mongol forces were near. The Mongols ruled through fear, a tactic so effective that entire regions evacuated upon hearing rumors of their approach. This system of terror created the Mongol peace, a period of stability that allowed trade to flourish across the vast empire, albeit under the constant threat of brutal reprisals. Despite the bloodshed, the Mongols' control of vast territories helped create one of the most prosperous trade networks in history. However, the legacy of their terror remained, evident in the mass graves discovered in Karakoram in 2019, where victims of Mongol executions were found arranged in concentric circles. These findings provide chilling confirmation of the accounts left by contemporary historians and archaeologists, cementing the Mongol legacy of fear and brutality.